Hello, and welcome to this introductory video of image capture, enhancement and publishing. My name is John Griffiths. I'm a member of the technical services team, whose job it is to provide software training and support. This video will outline the practical and software skills required to complete your early project-based tasks. Specifically, we'll be looking at how to digitize a sketch and create a basic layout with the resources available at UE. So you have produced a sketch and now you need to digitize it. Your two options are to use a flatbed scanner, which can be found in various locations around R block and Q block, or take a photograph of it using a dedicated digital camera or the one built into your smartphone. As well as the information in this video, you will find a PDF included in the materials folder which outlines the things to consider when capturing images using a smartphone-based camera. Here's a list of factors which will reduce the quality of your image during capture. I don't currently have an architectural sketch available at the time of this recording, so this image has been donated by my 6-year-old son for demonstration. So these are some of the factors which will reduce the quality of your image during capture. Your subject hasn't been evenly lit. Your lighting isn't diffused, or it's too directional. Your lighting has a color cast. An insufficient amount of lighting will typically cause camera shake issues, unless it's secured to a tripod. Shadow artifacts created by yourself or the room's environment. The image isn't straight, or it's distorted because the camera isn't centered to the subject. While some of these issues may seem insignificant at the time, dealing with them at this stage will usually take less time than trying to correct them later using software. If you're planning on scanning your work instead, you will find several flatbed A3 scanners like this one on both sides of R block on level 2, as well as at the Hive in Q block. You will be required to log into a computer to make the scan, and an operational guide can be found attached to the scanner. We also have two large format scanners. One can be found on the product design side of R block on level 2, and the other at the Hive in Q block. These require you to have a memory stick in order to save your file info. Again, instructions should be supplied by ITS, or if not, our team will be able to provide assistance if required. Once you've digitized your image, either via scanner or by camera, the next step is to enhance it. You may well question why post-processing of an image is necessary at all. Well, as you are probably aware, almost every image seen in print or online has received some level of enhancement, and it's now unedited images which often look odd or unfinished. Images of sketches rarely look good straight from the camera and usually need a little editing in order to better resemble the original drawing. So looking at an image of a sketch, you might ask yourself what exactly are the issues with it. Let's look first at the tonality. What's the colour of the paper used in this sketch? The answer is white, right? Yet the tone here is grey. This has been caused by two factors. Firstly, we have taken it out of its original environment, where an off-white would have looked far more natural. And secondly, the process of photo capture will always attempt to find a midpoint between the darkest and lightest areas. Because a sketch is usually dominated by bright values, using a midpoint will look underexposed. You might have experienced an example of this if you have taken photographs in the snow only to find that they look grey when you post them. Other common reasons we edit is to remove the colour casts from an image, add sharpening to correct image shake, increase image contrast, straighten an image, remove unwanted elements. If you've created the image using your mobile phone, you should have some editing features which come as standard. This software can be quite sophisticated and capable of correcting several of the issues I just outlined. Should you choose to use a third-party mobile editing app, there are many effective options to choose from. Here are some of the most popular ones. As well as for mobile devices, some of these apps can also be used on your personal desktop or laptop. Carver in particular is focused on creating layouts rather than simple image editing, and while we do not support mobile apps, most of these are quite intuitive and easy to pick up. Working with the UE licensed software, there are two suites which can be used to edit images and create layouts. These are the Adobe Creative Suite and Microsoft 365. The Microsoft Suite essentially shares the same image editing capabilities through Word, PowerPoint and Publisher. The advantages of using this suite is that its functions are easy to use and can be applied quickly. Also, users typically have more previous experience of working with the software. The Adobe Suite is the industry standard for image editing and creating layout. Its capabilities far exceed what Microsoft and the majority of alternative softwares are capable of. The negatives are that the software's greater complexity requires a greater investment of time to master. As there's a high chance you'll be working with this suite throughout your careers, however, I would recommend that you begin developing your experience with Adobe as soon as possible. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate the image editing in Photoshop and the content layout in PowerPoint. However, you can do both tasks in either suite. Should you wish to edit images using Microsoft, images can be added by going to the Insert tab and then pressing the Pictures button. Here is an example image which we'll be working on soon. Let's have a quick look at what image editing options we have available to us. With the image selected, clicking on the Format tab will display your editing options. And we have Remove Background. This has mixed results and you'll usually need to refine your selection to use it effectively. We'll be seeing this in action a little later. Then we have the Corrections button, which will give us some presets. Clicking Picture Correction Options will bring up the Options panel on the right hand side. You can adjust the image's sharpness, brightness, contrast, colour and saturation here, as well as crop the image. We also have a colour button, which in our case can be used to correct some of the colour casts you'll often find on your image. There are also some preset artistic effect filters which we can apply here. And we can also access a rotate tool as well as a crop tool, which tend to work better as a tool here rather than accessing it from the Format panel. All these features are relatively easy to use after a little experimentation, and some of them we shall cover a little later on in our demonstration. One other thing to note is that once you've made your edits, you can right-click the image and choose Save as Picture. This will allow you to save the image alone rather than you having to save the entire document. Switching to Adobe Photoshop, I'm going to demonstrate the tools and techniques we would use to correct the most common issues found in a sketch image. Adobe Photoshop needs to be accessed from the cloud-based software system called Apps Anywhere. By this point, you should have been made aware of the support available to you by IT services should you experience any difficulties. Just in case, however, I have included an Apps Anywhere IT guide in the Materials folder. Once you have Photoshop open, you'll also need to open your sketch image. If you have created a scan, then it could be saved to your personal account storage or to a USB device or onto your OneDrive storage space, which can be accessed from your UE email account. You can store images in this space by dragging and dropping them from the desktop. If you've saved your image to your phone, then you will need to connect it via a USB to a PC, or send it to your personal cloud storage, or email it to yourself. You can open images from within Photoshop by pressing Ctrl+O, or get it from the menu bar under the File heading and then find Open. Alternatively, you can use the File Explorer to navigate to your file, right-click it, and then choose Open With, and select Photoshop from the drop-down list. If you can't see it, select Choose Another App and scroll down until you find it. You can also tick the box, which will allow Photoshop to automatically open when you double-click any image file in the future. I should also mention that you can also simply drag files into Photoshop in order to open them, but please avoid doing so for this video as they are handled slightly differently. Making selections aren't something we're going to cover in detail here, but I do want to quickly draw attention to one of Photoshop's useful tools. If you're trying to select the subject from an image and there exists a clear tonal variance between itself and the background, this function can be very useful. Example files, including this one called Building, can be downloaded from the workshop folder, although you are more than welcome to use your own images instead. When opening an image into Photoshop, by default, the first layer displayed in the Layers panel here will be designated as Background and locked into place. Clicking on the small padlock icon next to the thumbnail will unlock it, granting you greater freedom to make changes and renaming it Layer 0. In the Properties panel above, look for the Remove Background button. You may need to scroll up or down in order to see it. Press it, and then in one click, the background should be removed. If we turn back to the Layers panel again, we can see that a mask has been created next to the image thumbnail. This is causing the black areas to be hidden. Mousing over the mask, holding down the Shift key, and then left-clicking it will allow us to turn it off and on again. With the mask turned on, we can now quickly save a version of the image without its background. To do this, go to File, and then choose Save As, and then change the Save As type field to PNG. You will also need to specify a location to save it to, and once done, go ahead and save it. This can be an extremely quick method of saving subjects from an image and will prove useful in the future. It's not, however, going to work well with our sketch images, so let's take a look at some of the other tools. Let's close this image by pressing the X in the top corner, and then we'll move on to our next image. I'm going to open the Sketch 1 from our materials. If you ticked the Open With box last time, you should just be able to double-click and open into Photoshop now. Assessing the quality of this image, I'd say it's generally high. The image is level and undistorted, the lighting is balanced, there is a tiny bit of reflection going on here, and I can also see a few shadowy areas to the right hand side. But they're not a big deal. It's likely that this image has been created with a smartphone camera as it's slightly underexposed. Another way of confirming that an image was created with a smartphone is by looking at the image size. We can do this by navigating to the Image heading on the menu bar and then selecting Image Size. In the window that opens, we can see that the image size is 16.1 megapixels and that it is over 1 meter wide by 60 centimeters high and has a resolution of 72 pixels per inch, which is a standard output resolution from a smartphone. This is why you should always resize a smartphone image before printing, or otherwise you will receive a 1 meter print. Notice that if we increase the resolution to the high quality standard of 300 pixels per inch, we would get a massive image of 280 megabytes. Instead, if we untick Resample and then change it to the resolution of 300, the image remains 16 megs, but the dimensions are resized to a more sensible 24.8 to 16.3 centimeters. As 300 pixels per inch is considered the high quality print standard, it's a good idea to do this as you'll get a better idea of the usable size of your images. So let's apply this. Next, let's zoom into the image to get a better look at it. Hold down the Control key and press the plus or minus buttons. This will allow you to zoom in or out of the image. You can then move around the image by holding down the spacebar and left mouse button and then moving the mouse around. You can also fit the image to the screen size again by pressing Ctrl+0. So I'm now going to run through the typical things that I would check and edit if necessary. While we're still zoomed in, we can see that the image is sharp, so it was likely photographed in good light or well secured to a tripod. There are a few sharpening options, such as under the filter tab here, but it is far easier to simply ensure that the image is sharp to begin with. The next thing to assess is whether the image is straight. Many images won't be, but in the case of this one, I believe it is. If we did need to correct it, we'd get the crop tool located here, or pressing the shortcut key C, and then adjust the crop by pulling the sidebars in, or rotating it by placing our cursor to one of the corner edges, which will then change our icon to a double arrow. Then if we left click and drag, we can rotate the image as required. As mentioned, this image seems straight on this occasion, so we can cancel it by pressing escape. Another common issue which this image does exhibit, however, is underexposure. To appreciate this better, hit M to select the rectangular marquee tool, or get it here from the toolbar. Next, left click the image, and with the mouse button held down, draw out the rectangle. What I plan to do is fill the selected space with pure white. You can see the colour you currently have selected by looking at the palette option down at the bottom of the toolbar. If you don't have white here, you can click the little icon to reset it to black and white, and click the other small icon above to flip between the foreground and the background. You want white as your foreground. Next, press G to get your paint bucket tool. You may find that you have the gradient tool currently active. To fix this, right-click on the gradient tool and you will be able to select the paint bucket tool from the drop-down options. Once done, take a look at the information you have in your options bar, which can be found above the document and below the menu bar. Your value should look a lot like mine, but you may find that the tolerance is set to a different value. What tolerance does is only paint pixels with a similar tonal value. So, for example, if I was to click an area with my tolerance set to 20, only areas of a similar tonal value would be coloured. If I was, however, to set the value to a maximum of 255, then the entirety of the area would be coloured and filled. Once you've applied that, press Ctrl+D to deselect the area. So the only reason we've drawn this rectangle is to bring attention to how far from white our white paper actually is. Unfortunately, however, what we have also done is just painted a rectangle over our original image, which is not good. Instead, we're going to revert our history states back to the point before we made our selection. To do this, we need to access our history panel. The small icon in the top corner toggles our history panel. Click it and the panel will open. When you make any action, it will show up here, and by clicking the previous state, you will undo the last action made, or several actions as required. Use this to undo our white rectangle. The history shortcut to undo this is the same as Microsoft, that being Ctrl+Z. Press Ctrl+Shift+Z to take you forwards again, like so. A better method than painting over the actual pixels of your image is to work with layers. If for any reason your layers panel isn't active, it can be found by clicking the Windows tab from the menu and then activating it. Click the Create New Layer icon from the Layers panel and a new layer will be created. If you move the Layers panel up and down, you will notice our original image is at the bottom and deselected. Our active layer is the new transparent one which we just made. Think of this as like putting a transparent piece of film on top of your image. Unless we select our original image layer from the panel, we will now be working on this new layer. To illustrate how these work, again draw out your rectangle with the marquee tool, fill it in with white, and then press Ctrl+D to deselect the selection. Look back at your layers panel and you'll see an eye icon next to the layer you just worked on. Clicking this eye will turn the visibility of the layer on or off again. You can also press V to select the Move tool and then click and drag the rectangular layer to move it around as needed. So let's leave this alone for the time being. Turn the visibility of this layer off and scroll down to the background layer and click on it to make it active again. Similarly to how one-click adjustments can be applied using Microsoft, we have some auto-enhance buttons in Photoshop. The more recent tools can be found once again in the Properties panel, and if we choose the View More option, an action window will open. Feel free to try these out, but from experience, I know that they will not work well for a current task. We also have a few other auto options here, which can be found under the Image tab from the menu. These are Auto Tone, Auto Contrast, and Auto Color. If we select Auto Tone, you should see an improvement to the brightness of our image, but for better results, we're going to do this manually. Once you've had a go at these options, please revert your history point back to just before you started applying these effects and ensure that the correct layer is still selected. Let's go to the Image tab again, but this time select Adjustments and then select Levels. The graph that it brings up is called a histogram. The left-hand side of the graph represents pure black and the right-hand side pure white. The volume of tonal values is recorded here. As you can see, the majority of information is on the lighter side. What we are aiming to do here is stretch out this information to create greater contrast. Click and drag the white slider down until the lightest parts of the image start looking like pure white. And once you're happy with the results, drag the black slider up until the darkest areas of the image appear to be pure black. Once done, you can press Apply. While this change should be more effective than using the Auto Tone command, the issue still remains that we have changed the original image, which ultimately degrades it. Once again, we have a solution, but I wanted to show you the levels adjustment first in a large window. In the future, however, I'd recommend using the method I'm about to demonstrate through the use of adjustment layers. So again, we're going to use the History panel to revert our levels adjustment and instead apply it using a layer. Left-click the icon at the bottom of the Layers panel called Create New Fill or Adjustment Layer and choose Levels from the drop-down. A new adjustment layer will appear and the Properties panel will display the levels histogram. Once again, adjust the light and dark points in this graph as you did previously. You may need to move the scroll bar down in order to access the controls. You don't have to apply the effect this time, and if you look at the original layer, you will see that it's unchanged. It's the layer above which is now having an active effect on the tone of every layer which is underneath it. We can now reselect our original image layer, which will allow us to continue working on it. We're next going to deal with the dark and light areas of the image that we looked at earlier. If you're struggling to see these, feel free to go to Image and then Adjustments and select Curves, and then click and pull down the curve line. You can move it around to really extend the lights and darks. Once these have been made apparent, please close this without applying it. Now the next process cannot be applied with an adjustment layer, but there is something we can still do to ensure our original image stays preserved should we need to use it at a later date. All we need to do is left click and drag our layer over the new layer icon, and then when we let go, we would have duplicated our background layer. So if we then scroll down to our original layer, we can turn the visibility of that off and instead work on its copy. This essentially leaves our original banked should we need to access it at a later date. So let's start by removing some of the shaded areas. Press O to select the Dodge tool, and then in the options bar at the top, set your range to midtones and your exposure to around 10%, and make sure that Protect Tones box is ticked. You can now move around the image, brushing over the shaded areas which stand out. You can reduce or increase the size of your brush by pressing the bracket keys. I'd recommend using quite a large, soft brush for this. Click and change your brush in the top corner here if needed. Feel free to swap the target range to shadows if necessary as you go along. Once you've spent a little time with that and you're happy with the results, we can switch to the burn tool, which can be found in the same location. You'll need to right-click the dodge tool and select it from the drop-down options. In the options bar, this time set your range to shadows and your exposure to around 25%, and again ensure that protect tones is turned on. This time we're bringing some of the weaker tones back. Notice that the more you move over an area, the greater the effect the brush will have. You can also change the range to midtones and work on brightening out some of the shading. You will have to be a little bit more careful applying these though. Don't be afraid to regularly hit Ctrl and Z as you work to redo the strokes if you're not happy with them. Once finished, there's one more thing I'd recommend doing, and that's to remove the colour from the image. Even though the image appears monochrome, because it was captured in colour, you will often find that a coloured cast will be present, especially if it's printed. To do this, we simply need to make another adjustment layer. From the drop-down, we could choose Hue and Saturation and move the saturation slider down to 0. But we will get a little more control if we choose Black and White. We can then adjust the sliders here to further refine the image tones. We can now assess the effect our efforts have had on the image. By scrolling down to the bottom layer, holding down the Alt key, and then clicking the bottom layer's visibility, we will turn off all the layers and back on again as we click it. And that's enhancement covered. There's not a great deal more we need to do with this image. It could use a little retouching and perhaps be stylized in a particular way, but these are elements which will be covered in later videos. So to finish off, we just need to save this image. Go to File and Save As. In the dialog box, choose a file name, choose a save location and a file format. I normally save my images as JPEGs or PSD, and only PNG over JPEG if I need to retain empty pixel areas. JPEG images take up less space, but will not save your layers. PSD is Photoshop's native format and will save your layers, but the files will be bigger. They also cannot be opened by some programs. I'm going to save mine here as a JPEG on this occasion. So for this final part, I'd like to quickly go over how we can combine our image with some text and organize it onto a page. Now, it's fairly hard to deny that Adobe InDesign is the most effective program for completing this task, especially if we are producing multi-page documents. And it's InDesign that I would recommend that you use. You can find a link to a dedicated InDesign video included in this workshop folder. As an alternative, however, you can quickly produce an acceptable page layout with several Microsoft apps. I'm going to quickly demonstrate how to create a page layout using a PowerPoint slide. Once you have opened PowerPoint, click on File, New, and then Blank Presentation. Firstly, select each of the text boxes and then press Delete to remove them. Something important to note is that PowerPoint slide dimensions don't match standard paper sizes. If your submission requires A4 or A3 dimensions, for example, you will need to change the page size here. Go to Design, and then Slide Size, and then Custom Slide Size. In the dialog box, enter in the values of 29.7 by 21 centimeters, and then click OK. This will give us the dimensions of an A4, but be aware that this is just an example and your submission brief would likely require some other size. Next, let's get our edited sketch image from where we just saved it. Go to Insert, click Pictures, navigate to your edited sketch image, and then click Insert. Now in this case, combining text with an image is going to be a bit problematic. The issue is that the sketch dimensions are very similar to those of the page, and we don't have much free space. Select the Home tab and you'll see a collection of shapes to choose from here. I'm going to pick the soft-edged rectangle and draw it out in this section here. I'll go to the Shape Fill option and then choose White, and then go to Shape Outline and choose No Outline. We can do the same thing again at the top of the image in the corner here. Once you've put that in, you should just be able to click the icons this time to set your fill and your outline. I'm going to be a little picky here because I'm also going to click this little icon for the shape options and set the transparency to about halfway, which will soften the edges of this shape a little bit. Go to Insert and then Text Box and draw out a text box. Type equals rand and then 2 bracket keys and press return. And this will give you some info about a quick fox. This is a fast way of getting some quick placeholder text. If you have a flashing cursor in the text box, then you can press Ctrl+A to select all the text, and then select the Home tab again and reduce the size of the text to something more reasonable. You'll probably need to delete some of this also. Do the same for the other area. I'm just going to add a line at the bottom of this picture. You can hold down the shift bar while you do this, and this will help you to keep it straight. If the format options aren't open, click the small icon on the ribbon to open them again. I'm going to thicken the line width slightly and change its colour. Remember that you can press F5 to put PowerPoint into its slide presentation mode in order for you to review the image at any time. You can press Escape again to exit this mode. And I think that's about as far as we can take this. If we did need to add more text to this page, we'd probably need to shrink the image down or remove a section of it. Let's try this next by using the Remove Background option. In the Slide menu, right-click the space below and choose New Slide. Again, remove the 2 text boxes. Select the image from the last slide, press Ctrl+C to copy it, and then move to a new slide and press Ctrl+V to paste it. What we're aiming to do is remove the bottom row of images from this sketch, which will give us more space to add extra content. With the image selected, go to Format and then Remove Background. And as we can see, PowerPoint has failed to see any subject and would like to remove everything. What we now need to do is mark the areas that we would like to keep. So using the Mark Areas to Keep button, and possibly also the Mark Areas to Remove, draw some lines so that the bottom row of the drawing is removed. I must warn you that this isn't an exact science and you may find it rather frustrating. And here's where I got to after a minute. I hope you had fun with our option. Once you've selected Keep Changes, we're going to crop away the blank area. Click the Format tab, then click Crop, and then choose Crop. Mouse over the crop tabs and drag them up. Once that's done, we're also going to shrink the image down a bit. Now, my idea here is that we make this page a bit more design-based, such as like a portfolio page. This would give us a little bit more room to balance out the text with the image. I'm going to add a few basic graphical elements. Let's draw out a box and recolor it. Feel free to pick your own color. I'm then going to duplicate this element by pressing Ctrl and then just dragging it out from the original. I'll reshape it and just use it here as some other structure for the page. I'm then going to select the big rectangle, hit Format, and then hit Send Backwards to push it back in the layer stack. One of the core principles when working with layout software, whether that's Microsoft or Adobe, is that they work much like a sticker board. You start with a blank board and then you stick content to it. Every time you add a new piece of content, it is placed on top of all the other pieces of content. The content below isn't harmed, but it can be completely covered by the content placed at the top of the stack. Now the reason we're seeing this hole in the image is because there's nothing behind it. Although it's a bit of a bodge, we can fix this by just sticking another white rectangle behind this image. So let's do that. So again, draw out another rectangle, shape it to the same size as our image, and then place it on top. You may need to change the shape fill to white and turn off the border once again. And once that's done, hit Format and then send it backwards. We might actually need to adjust the position of this image a little. And of course, we will also need to grab the white rectangle behind and move that to the same spot. So I now have a little room to add some title text here. Go to Insert and then Text Box, and fill it again with our random text. I'm going to increase the size and stretch out the lead in here. I'm actually going to give her a custom spacing of 25 to make it really wide. Then I'm going to make another text box on the other side. Again, I'm going to type in my rand, etc. to fill it up. And then select all, size it down, and then create space for a subheading. I'm going to make the top line bold and also increase the spacing of this line. You'll notice that PowerPoint will give you some guidelines in order to help you match up these two text boxes. I'd also recommend changing the text color to something more muted than a pure black. Perhaps we could sample a color from the image. To do this, select all your text and then click on the text palette, click on the eyedropper icon and then just hover over the tone until you find something that you like and then click to sample it. Once clicked, it will change the color of the text and also add that color to your palette. I think the image would benefit again from a couple of divider lines. As before, draw out a line, then change its thickness and change its color. Hold Ctrl and left click to drag out a duplicate. Pull it down and reduce its size. We could also add a slight tint to isolate the image a bit more. Draw out another square over the image. Choose Picture or Texture Fill from the Format background options. Change the texture to something you like. And after that, increase the transparency to about 80%. There is a little bit more playing around we could do here, but I think the page is pretty much finished, so let's move on. For our last page, I would like to use the image which we removed our background from earlier. Go ahead and create another new page. Remove the text boxes and then insert the picture. The original is called Building. Once again, this image will have a focus on graphics, simply because it allows me to demonstrate more of PowerPoint's features. It is likely your brief will not require such design. First, let's size this up a little bit, and what I'm going to do is create a bit of a negative space pattern on the image. To do this, let's draw out a few rectangles like so. Draw one out, and then duplicate it, and move its position a few times. Remember that this can be done quite quickly by just duplicating the previous rectangle. Now you don't need to get this distance between the objects perfectly apart, as we're going to use a command to do this for us. Click on one of the rectangles, hold down Shift, and then click the others until all rectangles are selected. Hit Format, and then click Align, and choose Distribute Horizontally. You can also use this to distribute any set of objects which you have made. With all your objects selected, you should see the Merge Shapes tab on the left-hand side. You should have the Format for Drawing Tools active in order to see this. Choose Union from the drop-down, and this will combine all your rectangles into one shape. Click off the shape to deselect it, and then instead select the building image behind it. Hold down Shift, and then click the shape again so that both are selected. You'll need to go to your Drawing Tools format once again, and then from there, go to Merge Shape and choose Intersect. This should apply the shape outline to the image. Reposition the image slightly so that it hangs off the page. Next, let's balance things out a bit. Create another rectangle which covers the lower 2/3 of the page. Go to Format, Edit Shape, and then Edit Points. Drag the left side down so that the angle is lined up with the image lines. Again, let's turn off the shape line and change the color. I'm also going to choose a custom color here and dial back the saturation, or just copy a tone from the image. Then, send the layer behind the image. Insert a text box. Fill it again with some placeholder text. And let's really scale it up. Choose a more interesting font as well. We can perhaps adjust the line spacing, use Tab to change the word positions, and recolor some of the words. On the text frame, you will see a content grabber icon. Use this to turn the text onto its side. Hold Shift to keep it straight. Then once you're happy with that, the last thing to do is just add some text to your liking. Here's one I done earlier. Basically nothing new to show here, I've just adjusted the leading and the text sizing. The frame you can see at the top is basically a rectangle with the fill turned off and just the outline turned on, and of course the outline has been thickened up a little. And so the final thing we just need to do is save our layout. One final thing we need to consider when saving and submitting our work is the file size. Personally, when I take pictures, I save the files at maximum size, as this allows me room to crop the print or to use at a large scale in the future. When it comes to adding several of these images onto a presentation, however, image size can become a problem. Working with multiple large files can also seriously slow down the software you're working with. The best way to solve this problem is to reduce the file size to a level appropriate for its purpose. Often a file size limit will be included as part of your work submission criteria. Looking under the Format tab, you will see the button Compress Pictures. Clicking this will allow you to downsize your images to an appropriate level. Looking at your target options here, the highest one is HD 330 pixels per inch. If this option is available to you, I'd recommend choosing it, as images with a PPI above this would offer no extra advantage. Unchecking the box Apply only to this picture will allow you to apply these changes to all images in the document. If your images or files are above a specified size limit, then reducing them to 220 ppi is generally not too detrimental to the image quality. For print and online submissions, the remaining two options should generally be avoided, as they would introduce an unacceptable level of pixelation into your images. The preferred format for project work submissions is usually PDF. Here's how to save your work in this format. Selecting the File tab from the menu will display your file handling options, one being Save as Adobe PDF. This would appear to be the most obvious option to use. However, for our purposes, this is incorrect. The default PDF settings will automatically scale all images down to 150 pixels per inch, which would typically reduce the quality of your images. Instead, and rather unintuitively, we need to choose Print, and once the print options appear, open the drop-down menu underneath the Printer tab and select Adobe PDF. Next, click on the link to Printer Properties. A new window will appear, and under the tab called Adobe PDF Conversion Settings, open the drop-down called Default Settings and choose High Quality Print. This will only compress images which are already too big and will keep them at a high quality level, in this case 300 pixels per inch. Remember that you can also scale images lower than this if there's no other way to reach a file size limit for submission. You can make other changes to the PDF here as required, such as adjusting the document size if needed. I'm just going to OK this and then press Print. Rather than send your document to the printer, you will be prompted to supply a location to save your document and the PDF will be generated. So that's the end of the video. I hope this has been helpful with assisting you in your sketch image submission. Thank you and goodbye for now.